Hi, Debbie. It's so great to see you again. I can't wait to gather more information. It's always such a wealth of information and beneficial, sometimes in a series, sometimes a standalone. So, what do you have for us today?
So, today we are going to talk about the hard parts in the early days of recovery. So, I've gathered 5 questions that show up in my office, and it really does focus on creating connection and attachment. As you know, addiction is an intimacy disorder. So, what happens in the case of sex addiction and the betrayed partner dealing with the addict is that we have a disruption in that connection that they've experienced. What I love about the codependence model is that it is very strength based and it's attachment focused. And it comes up with really practical ways for the betrayed partner to understand how to heal and why they do what they do and what they can do about it. So, attachment recognizes that we have a need to be connected to somebody else, and we need to do it in a healthy way. The unfortunate thing is that the addict learns to attach to unhealthy things like their sexual acting out behaviors, their pornography, whatever it is that they are doing, rather than turning to their partner for that healthy sexual intimacy. This is very traumatizing for the betrayed partner because even though they may know that their addict is struggling with that, they still want to turn to them for that love and that connection. And it violates their very human nature and that need to have that healthy, safe, secure connection. So, oftentimes, what occurs is that you have an addict partner who discloses, or you have the betrayed partner who discovers, and immediately there's this traumatic disruption in the connection that they share. So, at that point, that is where the betrayed partner deals with betrayal trauma. So, this betrayed partner is all of a sudden thrown into all of these really hard, difficult emotions and body sensations. And immediately they have to start thinking about what they're going to do moving forward. They've got to figure out how to get out of this. And they have to learn how to somehow get this partnership, this marriage, back to a safe and secure place so they can move forward and attach in a healthy way again. As you can imagine, there's lots of fear, there's lots of anger, there's lots of worry, there's feelings of devastation. So it's very difficult, it's very overwhelming in the early days. So that's why I want to talk about some of the really hard parts of recovery in the early days and the questions that come in, because I think these all have to do with attachment, like I said before. So the first question that has come into my office recently is this: why do I have so many questions about my addict partner acting out? I wake up in the middle of the night with them and I need answers to them right now or I can't regulate. So, this is a very common pattern. I am triggered, I've got questions. It's because our brain needs to put all the pieces together. Our brain likes to take facts and it likes to connect the dots and create narratives. We think in stories in our mind. The unfortunate thing is that when you're a betrayed partner and you only have partial information, you start filling in the gaps and you can create some big stories. And then all of a sudden, your brain makes you aware of the fact that there's another gap. And so you're constantly turning to the addict partner to get that information. But what happens is that there can be an adverse ripple effect. I go to you, I get more information, you disclose a little more, and I'm back in my betrayal trauma again. I'm back in that crisis period that we talk about. Remember, that crisis period after disclosure or discovery lasts, I've seen a minimum of 2 months. It can be upwards to a year. And during this time, the betrayed partner is trying to find that emotional stability, to get their feet back underneath them, to start to create their own safety and to figure out how they're going to do their own healing recovery. The betrayed partner needs information as part of that need for creating security. So that's why they often turn and ask questions again and again and again. In codependence, we refer to this as safety seeking. I need to make sure that you are safe. However, at times we get to that unhealthier end of the spectrum and we ask so many questions in such detail that that's what we're thinking of constantly as a betrayed partner. So let's talk about what are some healthy ways that you can deal with the questions that come up in the early days and get your questions answered. So recognize that with betrayal trauma, you are going to experience intrusive, ruminating, looping thoughts. So what are the difference? An intrusive thought is a thought that hits me out of nowhere. I could be doing something and bam, it comes, into my mind. I had a client share that they woke up in the middle of the night with a question. To me, that's intrusive. Stopped her from sleeping, woke her up, and there's that question. A ruminating question is, I have a question and I start thinking about it over and over and over and over. So I'm ruminating on it, right? I'm trying to figure out the answers. Got to get the answers. Sometimes we hold on to those ruminating thoughts for days at a time, going to the partner, trying to get answers from the addict partner because there's got to be more. There's got to be more to this. Then looping thoughts are, I might have 2 or 3 thoughts that I have kind of on a continual loop. It's kind of like the old-fashioned vinyl records being stuck in one track. And that's where I stay in my thoughts and I can't get out of it. The unfortunate thing is that when we are in those types of thought patterns, we are highly dysregulated as a result. And so it's really important that you begin to identify, okay, here's the question I have. So get clarity and ask yourself, what is it that I need to know? And why do I need to know it? How is this going to help me heal? How is this going to help me feel safe and secure? One of the things you can do as well is tune into what are the feelings I'm having right now? And will this information help alleviate those feelings? Another thing to consider is writing all this down in a journal. Sometimes we have so many thoughts in our heads and we're trying to make sense of everything in the early days of betrayal trauma that we're afraid we're going to forget. I'm going to forget the questions I want to ask. I'm going to forget the important parts of this that I don't understand. So if you write it down, you have record of it. I often talk about how we need to get this out of our body. So if I get it on paper, I can calm my mind down and my brain feels that sense of, okay, I'm not going to forget it. Then you've got to shift your focus at that point to self-care, to your skills and tools for regulating. So it's up to you as a betrayed partner, even though your trauma is not your fault and you did not bring this upon yourself, yet you have to do some work at that point in time. So that means self-care. What does that look like for you? Does that mean that I phone a healthy connection, somebody who's there for me, whether it's a sponsor, whether it's a friend who's been through betrayal, who can help me get grounded? Does that mean that I need to go take a nap? Does that mean I need to go eat? So what are my basic self-care things that I need to do? Oftentimes, there is a correlation between the lack of self-care and an increase in all of these ruminating, looping, and constant thoughts that I talk about, the ruminating thoughts. So do some self-care. Use your tools to help regulate. The only way to regulate is not asking the question. That is not the only way. That's not the only answer. You have the power and the ability to do that. Remind yourself also that while you don't have all the information right now, that you have the opportunity to do a formal therapeutic disclosure. So write the question down so that you have it. Save it for therapeutic disclosure. Talk to your therapist about it if you're struggling with this. Figure out a plan so that you have support, you have accountability. So as you're going to your therapist, you can talk about how you're dealing with your ruminating thoughts and how you're managing them. So it's really important that we learn to step out of our stories, because I say to my clients, it's like you're going down a rabbit hole. And once you're down that rabbit hole, it's really hard to stay regulated. In fact, it's impossible to. So do your best to catch yourself when you're in all those types of thoughts. Write them down, journal, seek support, do your self-care. Okay. Question number 2. Why do I have to wait for disclosure? I just know that I'm not going to be able to get out of my trauma responses without having this as soon as possible. This comes up probably a good 60, 70% of the time when I first see a client who's experiencing betrayal trauma. So they feel like they need to have that disclosure right away, so I know what I'm dealing with. The unknown feels very unsafe to me. So I need to know everything about it so that I can start to rebuild trust, or start to figure out how I'm going to rebuild trust. So remember, even though it feels very urgent for you as a betrayed partner, there is actually a timing to all of this. There is a process that you need to go through. So, for example, the addict partner has to be working with a therapist, and they have to get out of their denial and their shame. They have to recognize the effects that their addiction has had on them and on their partners. They have to have a lot of understanding. Some therapists ask that the addict partner has 90 days of sobriety. And in that time, they're also putting together their narrative. They're taking that history and putting it together so that they can then present it. They work with it in sessions with their therapist. The therapist wants to make sure that they don't have any shame behaviors in there or denial behaviors in their writing. So that's got to be taken out. Empathy has got to be put in. So it takes time. Remember, the addict has been working out of that limbic part of their brain, and we're now asking them to connect to that front part of their brain, the prefrontal cortex, where there's logic, reasoning, emotional regulation, and empathy. It takes time for them to do that. Also, the addict partner has to come up with some type of a plan. So that's the plan leading up to disclosure, where I'm going to take care of myself, how I'm going to push through disclosure, because disclosure is about pushing through denial and shame and taking full accountability. And then how am I going to take care of myself afterwards? Because it's difficult afterwards. Again, that takes time. That takes going into your therapist's office. So for the addict partner, she's also got to do some work, or he's got to do some work. So they've got to remember that, first of all, they've got to get regulated. I need to get you out of a crisis. I need to increase your window of tolerance as a therapist, because it's going to push and bound. I always say to my clients, your bandwidth is narrow. We've got to bump it up, get that window of tolerance bigger, because as you go through disclosure, it's going to bump up and down against your window of tolerance. I want you to have the skills and tools necessary and the understanding, the information that will assist you in staying grounded. What do we mean by grounded? Grounded means I'm connected to my prefrontal cortex. I am in my body. I feel like I can hear and listen, and my body systems are regulated. So my heart rate is where it needs to be. I'm not breathing fast, or I'm not shutting down. So we need you to be grounded and have the ability to do that. In addition, the betrayed partner needs to start looking at the impact of the addict's behaviors, their sexual acting out, their pornography use, their masturbation, whatever it is, has had on you, and begin writing down the impact of the addiction. So in the future, you can work on your impact letter for them. You too, as a betrayed partner, have to work on all of the self-care. So leading up to it, during disclosure, post-disclosure, you have to have a plan. And I work on that repeatedly with my clients when they come in. The other thing is you've got to put together your questions. So you've got to figure out, what questions do you really have? Now, with the therapist I work with, when we do therapeutic formal disclosure, we take those questions and we provide it to the addict partner's therapist so that they can then work with the addict to make sure they're answered. If they're not included in the disclosure, you as a betrayed partner still have the opportunity to ask it. So it's really important that there's preparation. In the meantime, another healthy way to put off disclosure is to set some boundaries around disclosures. So oftentimes the addict partner will remember something, go straight to the betrayed partner and share it. And now I've got a betrayed partner who is experiencing such dysregulation. They come into session and we're spending the whole time talking about what was heard, what was, the response, how are they going to get out of it? It's really hard. I also have betrayed partners that come into session and they're at their addict partner all the time. I know there's something, there's more, and so they're constantly on them. We call that the interrogation, right? And so we've got to set some boundaries around when I have information I need to know, right? Then go to them, and maybe it's a simple question. I need to know, did this happen? And your partner can say, yes. Okay, let's talk about it in disclosure. So that's one way to put a boundary around it. Identify when you're doing unhealthy disclosure behaviors. So that means that if you are the addict partner and all of a sudden you just can't handle what you just remembered and you've got to go dump it on your partner, we call it also a dump or a drive-by disclosure, then turn to your group, turn to your therapist, write it in your narrative, do something like that so you can process it. Journal, journal, journal. Okay. Resist the temptation to do disclosure too soon. So with the betrayed partner, lots of times we want to go in and we want to know it all at once. The unfortunate thing is that when it happens too soon and it's not done in that structured way, there can be a lot of damage. I have had betrayed partners come in who have been traumatized by disclosures that happen too soon, even though they might even be in session with a therapist when it's happening. So it's very important that we do the work that's necessary. It takes time. Learn about the specific steps of a therapeutic formal disclosure so you know what you're going to be looking forward to. And then really focus on your recovery. That's where you're going to kind of put all of that need for disclosure. So how long does disclosure, how soon before we can do it? It's probably about 3 months into your work. If somebody comes in and they're highly regulated, and maybe we've got somebody who's known about their partner's addiction for a while, and they've got some work under their belt, then they may be able to do it sooner. A lot of it depends on the addict's preparation and getting their disclosure narrative done, and the betrayed partner getting her questions and also getting emotionally regulated and having a plan put in place for both of them. So that's one of the things. Now, another question comes in. So the third question I get is, do I really need to do a full therapeutic disclosure? I'm pretty sure my husband's told me everything. Every time I go to him, he just answers my questions and I feel like there's no more questions to ask. Or I hear, I just don't want to be reminded of what he's done. It's too painful to hear about it. So the answer to that is you do not always need to do a therapeutic disclosure. However, as a therapist, I will challenge a client who comes in and says they don't want to do it. Here's why. I want to know if the betrayed partner is experiencing their own denial about the impact of their partner's addiction on them. Sometimes that is what we call a defense mechanism. If I deny it and if I minimize it, that's another thing I check for, then I handle it better. But I'm really not acknowledging the pain, understanding where I feel in my body, how it's, what the effect it's having on me, and working through it, then it's going to persist. I'm going to stay in that state and I'm not going to be able to heal. I read an example this week of it's like when you have cancer and you need to go in and cut it out, you want to make sure you get it all out and that so that there's nothing that can grow back. So sometimes, even though you may think you know everything, a therapeutic disclosure is kind of getting it all out. Also, there may be new information come up that you as a betrayed partner did not remember being told. And maybe your addict partner did tell you, but you don't remember. Another thing I check on with a betrayed partner who doesn't want to do disclosure is there avoidance? Is this a pattern in their life? Is this a pattern that's come as a result of this relationship and the disconnection, the struggles they've had in the relationship? Is it part of their own attachment pattern, maybe from their history? And so we've got to look at that because some people just don't want to look at the really hard things. And so that means that we need to do some extra work with the betrayed partner. So you need to really work with a therapist to determine if trust can be rebuilt without a therapeutic disclosure. So then I'll have a partner say, okay, well, I'm just going to have him do a polygraph. That is a tricky thing. Some people believe in polygraphs, some don't. I feel like all the information needs to be out there. You need to know the information prior to a polygraph so that when the polygraph is done, then when that information is disclosed, it's congruent. It's the same information. And then you can feel better that that polygraph is most likely accurate. Now, some people believe in them, some people don't. So check in with your therapist on that and find out what their stance is on that, and make sure you don't go out on your own and get a polygrapher and have a polygraph done, because there are a lot of people out there that don't know how to do this type, and they will take you for nothing but your money. And sometimes they report false positives, and they will also report false negatives. I have heard of examples where a polygrapher has been paid off in order to say that that addict partner had passed the polygraph. So keep that in mind. Okay, question number 4. Why does my addict partner trigger me so much? Will I ever get over it? Okay. The distinguishing factor of betrayal trauma is that The betrayed partner relies upon the addict partner for love, connection, security. Sometimes it's even for financial reasons, paying the bills, managing finances, might be for emotional intimacy. You're the only person I have in my world that I can really talk to and share my heart with. And sometimes we have just basic physical needs that need to be met, whether it's sex, safety needs, basic needs. And so as a result, the betrayed partner is living in the same environment as the addict partner. So my trauma trigger is right in front of me all the time. And I am watching that addict partner like a hawk as a betrayed partner because I'm trying to create safety. So I'm noticing every little thing that they do or they don't do. And as a result, when I see something that scares me, creates fear, worry, maybe I even go into a body response in my body, then all of a sudden, what's going to happen is I'm going to be triggered. I'm going to have a trauma trigger once again. So you have to be very aware of the fact that, yes, this does happen. And so what am I going to do if I get triggered by just being around my addict partner? And another question they often ask is, will it ever go away? The answer is yes, it will go away, but you have to do the following things. First of all, get into your own recovery routine and stick to it. Those that struggle are the ones that come in and tell me they're not doing their dailies. They're not out there reaching for others, people for connection, healthy connection. They're not doing mindfulness. They're not doing the things that are going to help them regulate. And you've got to stick to it. It's so important. You've got to learn what your triggers are. So understand when I see my partner do this, then here's the stories I go into. Understand your stories. Recognize when you're in them. Recognize then the associated emotions you go into, right? Because when I get triggered, I might automatically go into my stories. And it might be things like, he or she's never going to get over this. They're going to be addict the rest of their life. I will never be able to trust that this relationship can work out. You know, I don't know anybody who's been married to an addict where their relationship has worked. These are the things that I hear. So that's what's going to happen. Journal when you're triggered. Get all this stuff, the stories, the emotions, the feelings, the fears, the worries, the concerns out on paper. And then go in and process all this with your therapist or go into your group and discuss it with your group. Reach out for support. Find some things that you can do, some grounding tools, some way to manage when you get triggered, and put some boundaries in place around it. So for example, you might do the timeout. As a reminder, timeout is when you're limbic, when you start to go limbic, you cause a pause or ask for a pause in the conversation. You go do some self-care. You come back after at least 20 minutes, but you need to come back within 24 hours to readdress the issue. The other thing is maybe you need to spend some time apart. This works really great. I'm triggered, you're triggering me. So I'm going to go for a drive and I'm going to get a drink. And while I'm getting my drink, I'm talking about like a soda, everybody. Anyway, when I get my soda, I maybe call my sponsor or I call one of my close members in my group and talk it through with them so I can regulate. Maybe I need to take time for self-care. So remember, we want to create a little bit of pause and spend the time to regulate before we just go right in with that trauma response. So you really have to be in tune to what that trauma response begins to feel like in your body. It's very important. Triggers need to be managed. They just do, because it's going to prevent you from being able to do disclosure. It's going to prevent you from being able to move on. So while again, I want to emphasize and validate that it's not fair that you as a betrayed partner has to deal with this, and now you have to do all this hard work. However, it is going to help you feel better. It's going to help you move forward in a quicker fashion. I don't know if quicker is the right word, but you are going to be able to continue moving forward. You won't get stuck, okay? So question number 5, why is it hard for my addict partner to deal with my triggers and emotions? Why can't they just show up for me? Especially because they're the cause of all of my trauma. So remember, we've talked about the addict partner. They are dealing with denial and shame. Part of their work is they've got to identify all the ways they've been in denial, all the areas, all the specifics, as well as their shame. how it shows up, when it shows up, how it feels, when it started, right? The patterns of it for them, all of that. Remember, an addict, oftentimes the only emotion they really recognize is anger. That's really, maybe they recognize shutdown, but now we're asking them to really tap into something like shame so that they can then get to a place of empathy. So it's really difficult at times when all of a sudden the betrayed partner comes to the addict partner wanting support, wanting to be soothed, wanting to be supported and have empathy, only to have the addict partner get triggered and turn on them. And that's unfortunate, but it does happen. So it will get better. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time right now talking to the addict partner about what you do when all of a sudden your betrayed partner comes to you needing some support and help and comfort so that they can feel like they can move towards you and you can stay out of your denial and your shame and show empathy. First of all, when your partner comes to you and you have the impulse to defend yourself, you're going to step away and you're going to breathe. So recognize your pattern, recognize that this is your partner wanting safety. Use your tools for breathing. So you need to learn how to breathe. Which breathing works for you? Is it box breathing? Is it just slow breathing? Is it I go in and I've got to have somebody guide me in a guided meditation? So I've got to go sit and listen for 10 or 15 minutes, but step away and breathe. Let your partner know that you need to step away for a moment, right? To get regulated. A partner will appreciate that, but let them know you're coming back. A partner needs to hear that. Okay. Second thing, you've got to always remember what's happening. Reframe these triggers as opportunities to build and grow trust with your partner. Consider that these triggers take us deeper and help us learn about what's going on. And a trigger doesn't necessarily mean that you as the addict partner are being accused of anything. It just means your betrayed partner is struggling. And if there are accusations, you as the addict partner need to check in and think to yourself and really be accountable and ask, excuse me, is there any truth to these accusations? Okay, the next one, listen. You've got to turn your attention to your spouse and actively hear what he or she is saying. This means I make eye contact. This means that if I don't understand, I ask questions in a gentle way, not an accusatory way. It means that I might reflect back and say the exact words to my partner so I understand what he or she is saying. I want to make sure that there is no confusing communication or I'm making assumptions. So it's really important that you stop talking and you listen. One of the tools I tell couples to do is if you have a hard time with that, then always bring a notebook to when you're trying to work something out and write down what it is you want to say later on. But while you're there, you're going to listen. Another thing I like to do is write down what you hear your partner say they need or how your partner's feeling. This really, when a partner feels heard, then they can stay grounded. They can also have this conversation. They're getting some clarity from you. They're feeling supported. And it is a win-win situation for both. But it's really important that you listen. The next thing you've got to do is you've got to contain your shame. So this is the most important component of all of this. So that is, you've got to recognize your shame. If your therapist is not working with you on understanding your shame, get a therapist that understands shame and addiction and how they work together and all the intricacies of that. It's very, very important because remember, shame says we've got to defend. My shame tells me I need to attack. My shame tells me I need to be right. My shame tells me that my partner is so unrealistic and out of control. That is my shame. You need to remind yourself that you are in an addiction, that you're in therapy, you're in recovery, right? And that shame is a part of it. However, you're not allowed to take that shame. And I talk about just like spewing it onto your betrayed partner. So the ultimate goal is to take responsibility, to maintain your triggers, and to be able to be there for your partner. The other thing you need to do to show up when your partner's triggered is you've got to validate her pain or his pain. You have to connect with your partner by acknowledging the reality of their betrayal, that you were the one that caused it, that you're the one that has the addiction. So you're going to learn how to use different phrases that will help them feel like they're being validated. It might be something like that. Of course, you would feel that way if somebody did this to you. I totally understand that. Or it makes sense why that would trigger you. I imagine that's really hard. That feels overwhelming. So we've got to validate. This is how you learn to incorporate empathy in approaching your betrayed partner. So validation and empathy will go a long way in diffusing the trigger and in creating connection. Okay, next one, examine your own behaviors and if you need to, apologize. So check and see. They might come, they might be triggered. You may have done something. Now all of a sudden they need you to soothe them. So make sure that you are willing to look inward and take responsibility for anything you may do. If you don't know, then ask your betrayed partner. Have them explain to you what it was, and then check in and see if there's maybe some shame that's driving that, or if you need to apologize. I'm going to tell you that if you're a betrayed partner, you want to hear your addict partner take accountability and apologize often in the early days. It helps so much. It helps when you take responsibility for the behaviors that are creating the trauma in her. The next one is answer questions. So I know we talked about sometimes we've got to contain questions, but I think you need to use some real wise discretion on this, because sometimes they might have a follow-up question to something, or it might be a simple question. So rather than shutting them down and saying, oh, you're not supposed to ask me any questions, your therapist says you got to hold off until disclosure. No, you got to listen to the question and then ask, how will this help you? What information do you need to know? Right? And let them know honestly what the situation is. So let's say your addict partner comes to you and says something like, when you were on that trip back in September of, right after COVID, did you act out on that trip? That would be a perfectly fine thing to answer and say, yes, I did. And then put the boundary around it. I'm including that in my disclosure, and I will share with you more details then. So see if that works. It takes a lot of work for the betrayed partner to stay grounded and be going, oh, okay, but here's what I need to know. So share with them, here's what I need to know in the disclosure. I think that will help you feel like you've been heard and they understand why this is so important to you. Rebuild trust in the moment. That's the last thing. Ask your partner if there's anything that they need you to do in that moment to rebuild trust. Maybe they need some physical touch, but get their permission if they do. I love it when a couple came in and we figured out that the way for the female partner to regulate was to have her male partner just put a hand on her arm. That was it. And that helped her. And she felt, I'm connected to you. I trust that you're here with me. There might be a new boundary that needs to be put into place to create trust. You might need to change some of your behaviors. For example, if your partner says, I'm only seeing you go to therapy once every 6 weeks, you're only 2 months into your recovery. That scares me. I need you to go more often. That's an opportunity to rebuild trust. So do it. So I hope this information is very helpful in understanding some of the really hard parts of the early days in recovery as you're recovering from your betrayal trauma. I'd love to hear from anybody who's had hard experiences and how they've dealt with it, because it helps me to be a better therapist. And I can also use some of that when I come and I present some of my topics to all of you. So anyway, that's what I have for today.
Always great stuff. And I really appreciate you doing a deeper dive on formal therapeutic disclosure too. I love that you talk about journaling. We talk about that. Harriet Hunter did a webinar on that for us. She did a podcast with Dr. Rob. I added to the self-care. One of the things I find the most helpful for me is a walk. And I know why, because I found out that EMDR, the back and forth actually started, from walking. And I find that, like, if I have something that is even niggling around in my brain, like if I go for a walk, and even if I'm not even focusing on that, all of a sudden things start to, kind of align. So that has been, because I say often the scariest part for me is the space between my head. And if something gets caught in that going around and round and round, that's detrimental to me. Nothing good is going to come of that. When you talked about the why do I have to wait for a formal therapeutic disclosure, I hear so often, and I know you do too, that it's a deeper hole for the betrayed partner to dig out of from the trauma, whether it's a drip or I've interrogated. It's so there's no container, there's no support. It's just, you mentioned the dump or drive by. I always call it the vomit, because it's like somebody vomited on you and you have the stench of it, on you. So whether it's, somebody going, oh, I feel better now because I've told you, this, or you've been picking. And I know it's for safety, and it's the hardest thing to understand is you will be less safe. You will not get ultimately what you're looking for, and and it's detrimental. And we hear this all the time, that it's even worse. And I also know how hard it is. When you said, like asking the question, yes, and we'll talk about that in disclosure, I thought, oh my gosh, that has to be the hardest spot to go, yes, you should tell me it all right now, so just both of you hold, like, if keeping the focus on, we are looking to build trust, we are looking to restore a relationship that has been so fractured, and it's going to be uncomfortable for each and both of us, but we are pointed towards formal therapeutic disclosure because that can set a foundation for our healing to really be on a solid foundation, not a sandy one that's going to, collapse. I hear all the time, and I know you do too, where people, are constantly doing, the disclosures because there isn't stability. So I appreciated you talking about having 90 days of abstinence before, because otherwise it's just, yep, he can act out, leaving the disclosure. So you want there to be some, some form of stability with that. I know we got lots of questions, so I don't want to, oh shoot. Oh, why does the addict trigger me, and will I ever get over it? I thought, doing your own work, I have often where people are reaching out saying we need, and it's often the addict going, we need couples therapy. And, and I go through the whole process. Who are you working with individually? Get support from that. Oh, she's not, and I'm using genders here. So she's not willing to work with that. And I'm like, well, you can't really do the couples work and heal the relationship if you haven't, if you haven't taken care of yourself. And I look at it as, if you have a medical condition, you mentioned it too, if you have a medical condition, you get the help that you need to do the deeper healing, even if it doesn't, it doesn't feel good. You're on crutches, you're on whatever it is. But man, at the end of that process, you can be in a very different place and, have PT and go through things, whatever it is you need to get in a different place. It's worth the effort if you follow the instructions from the professionals. And then, oh shoot, I'll turn it over to, like, there's so much I have highlighted and everything else. Okay, so let's turn it over to questions. Okay. So the first one, nearly 5 years post initial D-Day, my SA partner's efforts have waxed and waned. I see his behaviors as often vindictive and resentful. He disagrees. Over the past week, he's disabled all accountability apps, changed his passwords in his phone off for 1.5 hours and come home with a backpack full of porn, and repeatedly violated other boundaries. I tried to break up with him, but I have no job and nowhere to go. My son lives with us also. I feel like I want to die. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so glad you're here. I have kept myself at a distance from friends because no one will understand. Why do I so desperately want to keep a relationship with someone who has cheated multiple times, disrespects me, and places everyone and everything else first? Does he really not see how messed up his behavior is? I also found out an old friend is in the shooter in our hometown last week, killing one 23-year-old policeman, injuring 2 others, and a pedestrian. He was killed as well. I feel like I have zero ability to determine character in others. All I want is someone familiar and safe to hold on to. How do I tolerate these intolerable feelings with no support? Why does it feel like my SA? Why does it feel like my SA is there for me less when I need him more? Oh, that's. There's so much here, but
There's
unpack
a lot
it for
there.
us. Yeah.
I'm going to unpack it. Number one, the fact that you're where you're at right now, the only way out of it is you've got to create connection with somebody else. you have to find at least one other person. So get in to see a therapist. Make sure you're in a therapist's office who understands betrayal trauma, who's a certified sex addiction therapist, because you've got to have somebody to talk to. And then determine, do you have a safe friend? Somebody that you can be accountable to, somebody who will check up on you. Remember, you've had such a fracture in this relationship, and there is so much I can see from your question. You're in and out of crisis all the time. So you need somebody that you can have a healthy attachment with. That's really important, because your addict partner is not going to show up for you. Your addict partner is not in recovery. That's the bottom line. Doesn't sound like the addict partner wants to be in recovery. And that is a very fearful place to be as a betrayed partner. So you've got to have somebody to turn to. You've got to think of them almost as they're like, that ring you toss somebody who is
Yes.
drowning.
I was thinking the same thing, the lifeline. Yeah.
Yes. Then that's where you've got to have somebody that'll do that for you all the time, because you're going to turn to your addict partner when you're triggered, and things are going to blow up, and it's going to take you deeper and deeper into your trauma. So find a good therapist, somebody who's got empathy, who can validate you, who can direct you, who can help you understand what's going on, who can help you process out some of those really hard feelings you have. They can also help you kind of figure out, how can I figure out who I can, who's good and who's healthy for me, and who can I attach to so I feel safe and secure. So that's one thing. Now, I do see betrayed partners where they say, I don't have the money to survive. I've got a child at home. It's impossible to leave. So I spend time in therapy sessions working on, how do we create safety in a situation like this? So we talk about boundaries. We talk about, if certain behaviors take place, I might have the betrayed partner and the child leave the home and go somewhere safe. It might be that you're living in different parts of the house. But in that time, work on making yourself ready. Work on getting back and getting an education or getting a job, and sometimes it's really hard because you're in betrayal trauma and you don't have any confidence in yourself and you can't even hardly think straight. But it's really important that you find something that you feel like you have power over. So if my clients can't work, then I say, we got to get you into a hobby or something, or into a group, like a hiking group, where you're doing something where you are actually feeling some hope about it, or something nice to look forward to, or creating that plan, like you said, to move forward. Now, you asked, why do you want to, desperately want to keep a relationship with somebody who's cheated so many times? It just goes back to, you're biologically wired to have that connection. And so you've attached with this person. This is the person that's supposed to be the one that you're the most intimately, connected to. And now they're the one that's hurting you. So yes, we want to repair it. Our brains don't like to feel, the pain that's resulting, the physical pain from what you're experiencing. And so we want to keep turning to our partner to have that soothing, to feel safe again. And when they can't provide it, it just makes it worse and worse and worse. That's why I think that those feelings would decrease if you find other connection. So maybe you can find a group. I would do a drop-in group, at Seeking Integrity, where you've got other people that you can kind of connect with or hear from, or know that you're not alone, but just do something. So that's some ideas from me.
Well, and a couple things, like take care of your son, make sure that he isn't your safe person. So I would ask that. I can't tell you how many, I've got multiple people who have the long game. Like you talked about making the plan, like they're going like, I can't leave right now, but I'm planning, because this person is not changing. So they're creating safe boundaries for now, but they've got the long game. Like they're looking at, like, a year from now, I'm going to, here's all the steps I need to get into place in order to make this transition. But they're checking in with safe people.
Mhm.
Some of them are updating me on where they're at, which is great. I want to be encouraging with that. But it's like, here's what I'm doing. I've contacted the attorney. I'm working on upping my job skills. I'm reaching out. I'm looking at moving out of the area because this area is a small town and it's toxic. Whatever. I mean, there's so many different things. So So I don't want you to feel like you're stuck and there's no hope, because you may be a little stuck in the muck right now, but there is hope, and there are people with a lifeline that'll help, pull you out of the quicksand, and give you support while you navigate this.
Yeah, and one other thing that I thought of is, it's been 5 years since your initial,
Yeah.
discovery disclosure, and you've got trauma, you've got old trauma too. So get a therapist who understands how to process trauma, whether it's through EMDR or accelerated resolution therapy, or it's through just teaching you mindfulness techniques and breathing and visualization. Find somebody who will help you reprocess that. So that's going to help you feel better, and it's going to help you be able to be in the moment and come up with that plan moving forward as well.
Since my husband's acting out behaviors were emotional affairs, not sexual, how do I know what his behavior around other women should look like in his sobriety? His being even polite seems to trigger me. How do I know what is danger behavior versus a trigger?
Well, one of the things that would be interesting to know is your addict partner and his emotional acting out. Does he understand why he does it? Does he understand kind of the behaviors he moves into when he does it? Does he understand the thoughts he goes into? I think that as a betrayed partner, it would help me understand what that looks like. And then together put some boundaries into place. So you're right. It might be that you can't have him be polite in a certain way to somebody because it is a trigger. So maybe it's just a quick hello, nice to see you, and move on. Or maybe it's just
Hmm.
hello. And so really get some clarity on what you as a betrayed partner need, what
Hmm.
that would look like, and then let's put some boundaries in place so you're not constantly triggered. Again, I think you need more information to understand his addiction around this, because this is a really painful experience, especially that emotional connection. And I often find with the betrayed partners that the emotional connection is oftentimes more painful than a sexual connection because it feels more intimate to the betrayed partner. So again, that you're going to have to work on your things too, so you can process that as well and get yourself grounded and do your own healing work.
Yeah, I think, I mean, going to Vegas, transactional sex, there isn't the attachment and emotional, the emotional fears, yeah, there's attachment, even if it's fantasy and not realistic. Okay. The next question. My betraying partner has been sober for 2 years, but has been so inconsistent with recovery work, transparency, keeping his word, breaking promises, etc., that I'm still struggling so much with trust. He was diagnosed with ADHD just last week, and we wonder if that is part of all this. Is there a correlation between ADHD and affairs, or just ADHD and troubles with solid recovery work?
I'm going to say that my observation is yes.
Mhm.
And I find that this is the struggle with somebody who has ADHD. It's really a good thing that you got the diagnosis. So you need to get on the medication you need to get on in order to manage the ADHD. You're also going to need to have somebody who can help you put together, a consistent plan, somebody you are accountable to. That could be your therapist. It could be maybe you go to a therapist that specializes in ADHD, but do that work, that foundational work. And then you might have to create a system for checking things off. You might need to create lists. Oftentimes, I will suggest to the betrayed partner that they read the book called The ADHD Effect on Marriage, because it really helps you understand how all of this works together. Um, it's really hard, I think, with ADHD. Oftentimes, they're so quick moving around and their brain goes so fast that they oftentimes forget to do things. Or an ADHD brain will also obsess on one thing. And so for you as a partner, you're trying to track it and figure out what's going on here, and you're seeing the inconsistency, and it does feel unsafe. So again, get the help you need. Focus on, let's get this ADHD kind of managed, and then let's see if recovery can be more consistent with skills and tools put into place with accountability and all of that. You as a partner understand it, so maybe read the book, I'm sure there's some wonderful YouTube videos out there on it, but get an understanding of, yes, this is normal, and you can step out of maybe some of those thoughts and those stories that, you know what, he's never going to get better. This is going to be like this forever. He's not doing recovery. So anyway, those are my ideas.
So yeah, there is no correlation. I don't remember the research, but I did share Dr. Todd Love. We have Troy Love on the website all the time, but Dr. Todd Love did a great ADHD webinar for Super Saturday Recovery Summit. I put the link in there. I about fell out of my chair when he talked about, some of the statistics and information. And then Dr. Rob did a podcast on sex, love, and addiction with him as well. So check out those two resources. We have lots of guys that come to our treatment program, and it isn't a reason to relapse. It is absolutely, I need to be more vigilant. I need to figure out the tools and techniques that will help me be successful. But we've had clients that go, well, I've got ADHD, I can't do it. Yes, you can. You just have to, it's almost like you have to try a little harder and figure out the techniques that will be successful for you. But Dr. Todd Love talked about the life expectancy of a male that has ADHD is shorter. So getting the help that you need, which can include time release medication or whatever, is really important. And we really encourage getting that diagnosis from someone qualified, not your GP, just handing out pills. As much as we love our GPs, it's somebody that can understand addiction and, these other, OCD, ADHD, clinical depression, et cetera. So hopefully that's helpful. But yes, it can make it a little more wobbly, but it's not an excuse for him not to be able to be successful. Okay. My spouse says he will do the things I ask if I continue to have sex with him. He's cut everything off when I don't. I am now facing divorce, disabled and financially unprepared. Any advice to not let that fear keep me from moving on?
That's hard. There's a lot of pain.
That's horrible.
And I imagine you feel really powerless too, being disabled and financially unprepared. Again, I know this sounds like I'm a broken record, but it's really important that you get support, especially because this is so painful. And you need somebody there. It's unfortunate that you've been kind of held hostage with this, that you have to have sex, then I'll do this for you, because that's not how a healthy relationship should be. A healthy relationship, there's a lot more involved in how we interact and the kinds of intimacy we have, from emotional intimacy to work intimacy to spiritual intimacy and all sorts of things. It's not just sexual. And so I think for you, really seek out some professionals too that understand divorce and understand the emotions that go through it. You are going to go through the stages of grief, not only because maybe you've had to deal with the fact that your partner's an addict, but now you're dealing with the fact that my marriage is ending. And that is trauma. That will create PTSD. It's a huge loss. So you need somebody there to help you, to support you, for you to connect with. And again, like we've said, ask people who've gone through a divorce what's helped them. Reach out to people like that. Join some type of a divorce group. There's lots of online divorce groups, so that even in that group, you've got people to bounce ideas off of or to get information from. And again, really focusing on good self-care for you. That's really important, that you take care of you and not focus so much on your partner, your spouse, and their behaviors. So it's going to take a lot of willpower to do that, but take care of you, get the support you need, find people who love you and connect with them.
So I put on in the chat, Moving On Alone. There's a new drop-in group for people who have left, have been left, or are really, considering leaving. That's on Thursday. Susan Anderson hosts that one. So check that out. It's on our website. And I tell partners often, talk to an attorney, find out what it's really going to be like in your state, because it differs everywhere, as to what your rights, how this would look for you, from a legal standpoint. So many do a free consultation or whatever. So check out some options in your area about that as well. You don't have to ever, pursue it, but at least you would know. Okay, 3 years since discovery. Addict has been sober from acting out behaviors for over a year. Betrayed partner has been working on their recovery for 2 years and works with a CSAT. Addict partner has been working with a CSAT for 4 months, as well as 12-step. Addict partner's CSAT will not even start working on disclosure until betrayed partner has provided questions. How is the betrayed partner supposed to know all to ask if they were unaware of the behaviors and to the extent? If they were on, seems like the addict will only be answering questions they are asked and not giving full story of their behaviors.
Um, that's an interesting situation.
Yeah,
I think that if you have a need to have a narrative that you understand the history of their addiction and then how their addiction has played out while you have actually, been in relationship with this person, that you have a right to have that. So if a therapist doesn't work for you, it's okay to change therapists, number one. Number two is use your therapist to ask those, to work on the questions. Because I do have betrayed partners come in and they go, I don't know what to ask, but I want information. And so we just kind of start exploring, what are the areas that you find that you have a lot of fear in? So even now you can start making a list of, here's my fears, what type of porn are they watching? I fear that it's this kind, well, I fear that they're doing it at work. So a question would be, do you ever act out, watch porn, masturbate at work? Have you ever? When was the last time? Things like that. So I think a therapist should be able to guide and direct you. I would also make the request that there be a narrative provided and not just focusing on the questions that you have. Have your therapist also advocate for you. I would have my partners sign an ROI, release of information, that gives me permission to talk to the other CSAT so that we can actually talk it through. And I can give input on what my client needs and how I've done therapeutic disclosures in the past, and really to find out, is this actually true? You're only going to do your disclosure based on questions. So have your therapist also advocate for you as well. But start when things come to your mind and pop in your mind, write them down. Have your therapist in session help you think of categories and think of questions in those categories. And that should help get your brain thinking about it.
yeah, that is. I don't recall ever hearing that before, so that would be different. And I'm also curious if the betrayed partner only heard about this through the addict, or if heard it from the CSAT directly, because I'm always skeptical. But I agree with Debbie. It's like, have the therapist talk and get a plan. Have them be, the goal with a formal therapeutic disclosure is healing for the relationship. So you guys want this to be as successful as possible and have things in place to do so. I will hold that story.
Well, another thing I just thought of too is if you're in a support group, that's why support groups are so wonderful. You can turn to those members that are really well into their recovery who have done therapeutic disclosures and ask them what types of questions they asked. What was helpful for you? Yeah. As a therapist, when I work on questions, I ask the betrayed partner the why. Why do you need to know this? How is this going to help create connection? How is this going to be rebuild trust? So keep that in mind too as you put together your questions.
So do you have, we're out of time, but do you have time for a couple more questions? Mm-hmm. There's 3 more. Okay, we're going to hang in there, the last 3 questions. So I have been sober from porn for over 2.5 years. My wife has decided after a long process with me for 3 years to get a divorce. During the last 2.5 years, I've trickled disclosed to her, and we moved in and out of a relationship as she would take me back and then ask me to move out on multiple occasions. She filed for divorce multiple times. She would have the courage to step back into the relationship with me, but then it would be too much and she would need to put up her wall. And we have 4 young children together. Throughout the whole relationship while we were dating, she broke up with me to date someone else twice. And when I initially disclosed my addiction to her 13 years into our marriage, she filed for divorce and started to date another guy, but then got back together. She just moved out 3 weeks ago and informed me that she has a new boyfriend. With this limited information, in your opinion, what is coming up for her? Is this a pattern of betrayed spouse, and she may continue this pattern?
So this actually is about attachment. I'm going to circle back around to what we talked about at the very beginning today. And that is, we each have certain attachment styles based on our experiences growing up. And so there are some people who have avoidant attachment. So they have a difficult time really staying in a relationship, doing the hard things. Like you explained, she keeps breaking up and moving in and out of a relationship. Some people have a very disorganized attachment pattern. She may have that as well. And for you, you may end up having this, anxious attachment because of all of this going on. So it'd be really wise for you to learn about attachment and understand that. My thought is, unless we understand what we're doing and we're aware of it, and I understand my attachment, why I'm doing it, and figure out how to move into more secure, healthy attachment behaviors, then the pattern's going to repeat. So even in a new relationship, the same attachment pattern is going to show up unless you've got somebody who's very secure in their attachment and somehow they can help that person feel safe enough to stay connected. But that's just occasionally that will happen. I don't think the reality is it happens every time you're in a relationship with a secure attachment, someone who has secure attachment. So anyway, learn about the attachment. That will help you understand your attachment style, and then get into your therapist and work on healing that in you and figure out what caused that and what parts that you need to heal.
And to me, this is not about her. I mean, she's moving on. So you have 4 kiddos. This is about what do you need to do the work when you've been, you've been waffling, like you've been doing trickle disclosures and you're doing all of this. So you've been sober, and sober is the very, there's abstinence and sobriety, but recovery is completely different. You are living a different life. And I still hear in tones of this that, that there's struggles, and it's almost like, I want to know about her. You got enough to deal with knowing about you, and you can be the dad that those kiddos need. You will co-parent with her forever. You will co-grandparent. You can't even imagine that, but you will. So how can you be the guy that shows up to be the best dad that you can, to be the best co-parent that you can, with her, and make it good for your children regardless of what she does. And I guarantee, if you don't get the recovery, the real recovery that you need, you will take this into other relationships. So I can't emphasize enough, take care of you.
Yeah, we could do a whole webinar on that.
Yes, we could. Okay. What type of therapist is best for an addict with co-occurring addictions, infidelity, drug, and alcohol? Is CSAT only? And I'm going to say yes, but there are people that specialize, that there's a CSAT, but there's CMAT, certified multiple addiction therapists. So they have training specifically for other problematic addictions. And so like when we have guys that come to our treatment program that they have co-occurring, I am looking for someone who specializes across all of that if they don't have a therapist. So yes to CSAT, because that's highly specialized training. I have lots of people that go to drug and alcohol therapists, and they can't even assess for, sex addiction. So CSAT, ideally, with a higher level of training for that. Other thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And you got to get them out of the drugs and the alcohol.
Yeah.
You can really get them to do the sex addiction recovery work. It's just necessary.
And that's hard. I got to tell you, like, those are really hard co-occurring to do on an outpatient basis. Not impossible, but man, it's like, like multiple meetings in a day, whatever you need. But stopping the chemicals first, drugs and alcohol, smoking, everything, and then addressing, the sex addiction. But it's challenging because something triggers, and it's really easy to go back to one of those, or to, or it's food, I mean, whatever it is. So, but yes, the qualified therapist is a start. Okay. Last question. My partner and I have been together for over 8 years, and I have known about my partner's SA for most of that time. How can I deal with rage? I became so angry at times. I even became physical with my SA, lashing out. How do we avoid separation? We have been knocking on this door for the past few years. Most importantly, how do I deal with overwhelming feeling of loss, of hope? I am in so much pain. I've contemplated suicide. I have been in therapy for the past few years for PTSD from a sexual assault. So this has been triggering this trauma, as well as my childhood trauma with a mother who was alcoholic. I feel like I'm falling apart. Oh, I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah. The first thing is you've got to increase your window of tolerance. That's why you're raging. And so when I see a a trade partner struggling with this and they go into rage, which is a variety of emotions that we feel intensely at one time. It's anger, it's devastation, it's fear, it's all those really rejection, those feelings coming together at one time. So getting on medication, sometimes you've got to have an evaluation with somebody who understands mental health, a psychiatrist, a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and work with them closely to find what will work for you so that you increase your window of tolerance. That's going to help you so that we can bring that rage down. I think you mentioned that you're seeing a therapist. A couple of things, because you've had so much trauma, a part of your recovery is going to be a lot of trauma work. And a lot of that trauma work, especially since you're going into rage, should focus on clearing your body of some of those sensations with the trauma. So hopefully you've got a therapist that's helping you kind of not only work in creating more stability in the relationship and not going into rage, but at the same time, you're working on some of this trauma, because I truly believe that it's your trauma that's contributing also to that rage. And it's the situation with your SA partner that's triggering you, and you go right back into the intensity of that trauma. You go into your PTSD like that. And oftentimes that rage is a part of that fight response that we go into when we're limbic. So we've got to kind of understand a little bit about your pattern there, and then figure out how can we reduce some of the trauma responses in your body so you're not going into such, huge, big, emotions, and it's difficult for you, and it's not safe, and it's abusive if you're hitting your partner, and it just creates further disconnection. So start by getting an assessment for yourself, get on some medication, see if you're dealing with maybe something else. Maybe you've got underlying anxiety, or maybe you've got, some bipolar going on. And then that way you feel like you've got support there that will help assist you in this as well.
And there is no more expert treatment. I mean, he's an SA. You've known for 8 years, oh my gosh, that is, you're doing the same thing over and over again. There's help for him. And we have a family specialist that supports, partners as well. We look at this from an attachment standpoint. I hear regularly from trade partners and spouses that when the guys have come to our treatment program, that they feel like they can have hope, that they see he's changing. They see a path forward that would be different. So, getting the right level of help, you getting support, that's how things change. Otherwise, you guys can continue to do this really negative and violent. I mean, that, domestic violence on either side is not okay. Like, last thing you need is a police, showing up at your door. So getting help, to get off this, I call it the negative 2-step. You guys are doing this really negative, toxic dance, repeat. One of you steps off and stops doing that dance. Guess what? The dance steps change. So,
yeah. And you've also got to work on some real clear-cut boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
You got to do a lot of boundary work on this.
Yes.
And it's going to be hard. And I feel like people are more successful when they have accountability. Get into a group, have a sponsor, you get into a 12-step program as well to help you. I think that will also help you regulate.
There is hope. And I'm so, like, the suicide, I don't take that, like, get help, that is not okay, that you are that, that desperate. It doesn't have to, lots of people heal from this, not everybody chooses it. We said that earlier about someone else, but there is hope. I'm in recovery. Lots of us actually, can live a life of, of integrity. So, we can learn, we can change if we're willing. So, but not all of us are willing. So, Thank you, Debbie. Great to see you. Enjoy your vacation.
Thank you so much. Everybody,
wear your sunscreen. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.